Have you ever run into a point, and I ask you this because I get asked this question too all the time. Have you ever run into a point where being homeschooled and not having a traditional college degree has been any sort of impediment in either landing a job or like interacting with people inside of a job? And maybe, I mean, I guess maybe it's fair to ask, like in your actual job too, it feels so obvious to me that that's not the case, but maybe also worth addressing because it's not necessarily obvious
Yeah.
to someone who hasn't tested what the world can actually bear if you're walking on uncharted ground.
Yeah. I've experienced both. I've experienced where people are actually stoked that I was homeschooled, where they see it as this unique kind of perspective in the world. So I've
Hmm.
experienced that actually a lot. I have experienced some people who are more traditional, where like they want to see the college degree, they want to see the nice private school or whatever on your resume. So I've experienced both, but I've actually been quite surprised with the amount of people that actually found it to be like an advantageous thing because, like you said, there are some stereotypes, but I also feel like there's kind of this under the ground stereotype, which is that maybe homeschoolers are smart. I mean, I know that usually it's not. Like I said, there's one that's like, oh, they're dumb and that's why they're there. But also, like a lot of the interactions I had, they're like, oh, this guy might be a wizard. Like he might be homeschooled because he has a gift or something like that, which is not true.
He can see the future and like conjure storms.
Yeah, exactly. So I've experienced where it's been like a positive thing. My biggest challenge has been my age. I mean, I'm young, So when you have a lot of responsibilities, obviously people question you more. I get more age kind of questioning type of stuff than I do anything else. But I've seen it actually being an advantage in some sense of the homeschool, which is not what I expected. So I don't know if you've
Is
experienced the same thing, but
Yeah, it's pretty similar. Like I very quickly ended up on a career path that did not require any type of credentialing. Like nobody in the startup world cares. Nobody, when you're an entrepreneur, cares what your education background is.
mhm.
Um, I'm sure there are arenas of all of these worlds where people would care, but they're not really arenas I care to play in. So it
Yeah.
doesn't really matter. Um, I definitely have been in many situations where people think it's an asset that I was homeschooled. And even if they don't, it's really great for getting in the door, having a conversation with somebody because it's interesting and it's different. And so people want to know more. And then once they start talking to you, it's the conversation very quickly to pivots to something else that is also interesting and nobody cares anymore about your education background. So I didn't have any college at all. I was homeschooled all the way through first grade through 12th. Um, and I feel like it's been such an asset, both in terms of personal branding, for lack of a better term, like positioning myself in the world and having conversations with people is just an interesting talking point. But I also feel like I just got a head start on a lot of the things that I wanted to do because I was homeschooled. And there's a lot of assumptions about how the world works that are instilled in school that I never had to unlearn because I was never there. So a lot of the things that I feel like I want to go out and do, and there's no clear path for me to get from point A to point B, I'm not afraid just to be like, oh, I'll figure it out. And I feel like if I was in school, I would be much more reticent to just go and do the uncharted thing because I would just assume that there is a path for everything that is pre-prescribed because that's how everything works in school.
Mm-hmm.
But because nothing was pre-prescribed, it's like, well, I want to learn algebra. Okay, what are we going to do about that? Like, how are we going to find a resource? What worksheets am I going to use? How much do I actually have to do? There's no clear cut, oh, you just sign up for this class and then someone will tell you what to do every day. And so I feel like that's really translated to how I've thought about my career. Like I think I'm way more entrepreneurial than I probably would have been if I'd gone to school because I just assume the world works this way.
Yeah.
I'm really curious how much of that translates to your experience too. Like you are also very entrepreneurial. How much of that do you think is a byproduct of having been homeschooled?
I think a lot. To your point, I think it was a lot because you're not in the framework that most people are in. And, I've seen this a lot too, where I think there's like some statistic or number of like the amount of, I don't know. I think it was like, I'm pretty sure Elon Musk like dropped out of college or something like that. There's like some statistic where there's like a lot of like really high level people who like just chose to not kind of go down that path. And I think it's because that structure to some degree actually inhibits growth, right? It inhibits you to kind of be scrappy and be really creative. And that's actually why like I've gravitated towards working with startups, because that's like the world I'm used to, if that makes sense. And I contribute a lot of that to homeschool for sure, because I didn't have to unlearn anything. And I see there being kind of that, what you said, a little bit of unlearning that people have to go through, versus it was all kind of just new for me from the get-go. So I feel like it's translated a lot. I question this all the time, like how different I would be if I went to a traditional school. And it almost not makes me sad, but it does, because there's parts of me that I'm like, wow, like I really like this about myself. And that I think it stems directly from homeschool. And that one decision could have changed who I am entirely, you know, and that's a crazy thought. You know, like I said, I like the entrepreneurial world. I find it fun, kind of in a different section with a more video type of stuff. But for me, yeah, I do think if I wasn't homeschooled, I'd probably be doing something way different, you know, and probably not as good at it as I maybe am to some degree. So
I kind of like the analogy of the like neatly pruned pine trees that are being grown to be Christmas trees. Like if I had been in school, I would have been all neatly pruned, and I like would have been, there are things about how I was shaped that would have been much more beautifully like perfect and well conformed. But I kind of like that I was allowed to grow wild and unruly. I feel like in the long run, if nothing else, it makes you different, and different is interesting. But I also think it's, you know, vastly beneficial for so many different things in my life. Are there specific things that you think about that where you're like, oh, I feel like this thing about me like actually is like a thing that I can pinpoint that would have been different if I had gone to regular school?
yeah, I mean, I would say a lot. I mean, obviously with my career and kind of starting very early, I mean, that's like the first place I would go to, is like, I would probably, it's hard to say where I would be exactly. It would be a cool side-by-side comparison for sure. But I think that's the first thing, is like, you know, I think we do a lot of things with age where we're like, okay, when you're 16, this is when you can drive. When you're 18, this is when you can, you know, do this. When you're 21, et cetera. And these kind of stem from, you know, majority of people at that age, that's potentially when they should be allowed to do X, Y, and Z. I never felt like I fit into that. I always felt like I was being held back in the world. And for me, it would have been soul crushing to be in school with having that in my, you know, more of a nature thing just about me, of just, like I said, since I was a kid, I wanted to work, and was upset that there was a law that I had to like go through in order to get like a worker's permit as a kid. I was like, what? I just want to work, you know? So I think it would have been, first off, career wise, definitely destructive in a certain sense, or very different than where it is today. And then also, I think my growth overall would have been stunted. So I contribute, you know, a lot of what I've been able to do at a young age because I just wasn't being held back by school. So that's kind of the biggest things. And then, you know, I mean, it changes the course of your kid's life, you know. Small decisions can change your life dramatically. Imagine a big one like homeschooling or traditional school or private school. So these are important decisions that you need to think about. And I do think it's safe to say that almost everything about me would be different. And that's crazy.